So I'm Lisa Hasso. I am just going to run through a couple of housekeeping items with you quickly before we get started. So welcome to today, and thank you for participating in the Affordable Housing Researchers and Developers discussion today. All audio and video have been turned off except for our moderator and our panelists. So we will be taking questions throughout the webinar. We just ask that you enter them in the chat and they will be responded to as appropriate. So once the question is entered, I'll let the speakers finish what they're talking about, and then I'll let them know the question that's been posed. This is also being recorded and will be sent out to all attendees after the webinar. So if there's no other questions, we can go ahead and get started. Corey, I will turn this over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. Again, good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, Affordable Housing and Researchers Developers Discussion. I'm Corey West, a senior manager at Summit Consulting, a DC-based consultancy primarily supporting federal government agencies, in which we strive to deliver data-driven solutions to help make government effective and just, and society just. I'm co-hosting today with one of our teaming partners, Vidura Gupta. Vidura, please take a moment to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Corey. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. My name is Vidur. I'm the founder and CEO of Beacon. We are an AI platform that helps apartment, single-family operators and lenders in underwriting faster and optimizing their portfolios using cutting-edge machine learning and data.
David, introduce yourself, please.
Yeah. Thanks for the invitation. Looking forward to the discussion. My name is David Jaffe. I'm a professor of sociology at the University of North Florida. I direct the JAX Rental Housing Project at University of North Florida, where we collect data and analyze the rental housing market with an emphasis on ownership patterns and the impact on tenants.
Thank you, David. Joel, please go ahead.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joel Patterson. I am a senior vice president of Dante's Partners. We are affordable housing shop based out of Washington, D.C. We have about 3,300 units under management, and we are also have projects in about 6 states at the moment. And we're looking forward to participating in this webinar and conversation with you all. Thanks.
Thank you, Joel. And Richard, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you very much, Corey, and also to Vidur for sponsoring this. My name's Richard Koss. I'm the Chief Research Officer of Recursion. We are a cloud-based big data analytics organization in the housing and mortgage space based out of New York. We cover a wide variety of areas and a wide variety of clients in the public and private sector. I'm also an adjunct professor at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, where I focus on housing policy and affordable housing finance.
Thank you as well, Richard. And Bob, good afternoon. Please introduce yourself.
Hey, it's nice to see everybody. My name is Bob Simpson. I'm the founder and CEO of the Multifamily Impact Council, which is a nonprofit membership organization focused on developing impact investing standards and principles to support more affordable, sustainable, and equitable rental housing in the United States.
Fantastic. Thanks, Corey, and thanks everyone for the introduction. We've got a fantastic group of people today, so why don't we jump right into it? So the first question to the panel is, what's impacting the supply of affordable housing? And maybe we can start with David.
Okay, thank you very much. The biggest factor impacting renters in Jacksonville, where we're doing our research, and in many other cities in the United States, is what some people call the corporate landlord invasion. We describe it as a financialization of human shelter. This is where you have large corporate entities, private equity firms, real estate investment trusts, real estate investment firms purchasing single-family homes by the hundreds and thousands, which is taking place in Jacksonville, converting these to rental properties, and then bundling these properties into portfolio investment opportunities. The very same thing is happening in the multifamily apartment complex sector, where you have similar kinds of firms purchasing multifamily apartment complexes, bundling them together into portfolios, again, for their investor clients. This activity has escalated over the past 4 years dramatically in Jacksonville. And with the acquisitions, usually what follows are sharp rent hikes, additional fees, and often maintenance cost cutting. And not coincidentally, Jacksonville has been consistently cited, among major metropolitan areas for the percentage rent increase, usually listed in the top 5 or top 10%, at least a year ago. So, based on the research we do and the conclusion we come to, we really don't believe affordable housing is possible under this expanding business model.
Thank you, David. Bob, Richard, or Joel, I want to chime in on that as well, please.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that we've seen that's really impacting the supply of affordable housing are a couple of things. Number one, obviously, the lack of funding for affordable housing is a challenge. Developing affordable housing properties, especially in the multifamily sector, often requires a combination of public and private sector capital. We continue to see a significant amount of new construction happening in the low-income housing tax credit space, where you see anywhere between 60 to 100,000 units per year coming online. That's nowhere near enough. I think the other challenge that you're seeing, obviously, the cost of materials and the cost of construction continues to go up, although that is recently moderated somewhat. And the third issue is really around land use and making sure that we're making the most efficient use of the land in the communities that need housing the most. From a zoning perspective, making sure that the regulatory process is done in a way that doesn't add unnecessary cost to the way in which we are able to build properties. All of those things really factor into what's making it hard to create new supply today. And that's really, I think, maybe from a more 35,000 foot view, that seems to be what's driving a lot of these issues on the supply side.
Thanks, Bob. Richard or Joel want to chime in on that as well?
Sure, I'm happy to. Those are both very pertinent points, absolutely. In addition to the costs that Bob mentioned, it's the cost of credit is extremely high at the moment, and that's a very large cost, as we are familiar with. And we keep hoping rates will come down, but hope is not a strategy, and they keep staying up. So we'll see how this unfolds. An additional element is the cost of insurance and the burgeoning effects of climate change here, which affect many parts of the country. Where David is in Florida, we keep a sharp eye on that, and in that regard. And finally, because a lot of these programs have a timeout and they've been going on for some time, we are in danger, and we're starting to lose affordable units who are maturing out of programs. LIHTC, for example, is supposed to last 30 years as affordable. Well, the program started just about 30 and a few years ago, and not all of them make it to that deadline. But the National Low Income Housing Coalition estimates that there's about 800,000 units at risk over the next 10 years. Not all of those automatically get out of affordability, but enough to where it's working now against the new construction that Bob mentioned.
Thank you, Richard. And Joel, as somebody who's on the ground actually developing these units, what are you guys seeing as some of the limiting factors?
Sure. I will echo what Bob and Richard is saying as far as the financial macroeconomics that are impacting. I would say more local. I would add to that is just the tightening of public resources. Because we are seeing that a lot of housing finance agencies, because there's a demand, you fall into one of two buckets. One is that everybody is trying to get their projects funded at the same time, and the resources are limited from a budget-based annual budget or fiscal year budget, however you're wherever you're operating, however they finance their or approve their budgets. The other space is that you do have interest rates that are driving the cost of the gaps that are being you have all of these like Richard said, mentioned insurance costs, you have construction costs. All of these costs are creating a larger gap, so that's requiring more funding and support from the because we can't, as affordable or capital A affordable, using LIHTC subsidies and other subsidies, you're not able to pass those costs down. So it just creates a gap on your, or a strain, I should say, on your capital stack that really limits the amount of deals that will inevitably pencil out to actually get shovels in the ground. And I would say on the back end side is the deals that do have shovels in the ground sometimes get stuck there because of the inability for a takeout loans and other products that can take out the cost of the construction loan such that that project can stabilize. So those are the kind of the back end issues that you're running to as well, and being able to put these units in service, and also on the front end be able to just get two shovels in the ground.
Thanks for that, Joel. One question along those lines. Can you, what is a takeout loan? Can you describe what a takeout loan is for the audience, please?
Sure. So in your kind of standard project, you have well, this assumes a new construction project, right? So you would get a construction loan that'll allow you to build your project. And that construction loan usually has a variable or floating rate, meaning that it's based off of SOFR, your 30-day SOFR, and it varies month to month. So wherever your market is, it's following that market. And then once you kind of stabilize the property, what you typically want to do is you get a permanent loan that essentially replace that construction loan. The permanent loan will have more lucrative terms. That'll be a fixed rate usually, and you'll have a loan term that will have a based off of a spread, U.S. Treasury spread over U.S. Treasury. That'll allow you a bit of a more predictability and a mortgage that you'll be paying down for. Typically in affordable housing deals, it'll be anywhere between amortizing anywhere between 15 to 40 years, depending on the product. But that'll be a more loan that will stay with the project through the operation of the tax credit compliance period versus your construction loan, which is highly levered against the SOFR, ongoing SOFR rate.
Oh, thanks for that, Joel. So one question, we're thinking about is like, what places are doing a good job that we're aware of? They're doing a good job of providing sufficient, well, in quotation marks, sufficient amount of affordable housing. Any models that come to mind for the group?
Sure, I'll take the first stab. Just from some of the things that I'm seeing in the market at the state level, at the federal level, we have the Tax Relief for America Families and Workers Act, which is essentially a bill that's proposing to reduce the bond financing, 50% bond financing test to 30%, and also increase bond allocations by 12% over the next 2 to 3 years. So at the federal level, that's really helpful for all around. But to kind of go down to more of a state level, I know David's state, Florida, they recently passed last year the Live Local Act, and that is an act that's hugely instrumental in driving affordable housing to the state of, or within the state of Florida. I believe they have about 711 million. It was the last number I saw. David, you may be able to correct me if that number changed. Of funding and bringing funding in at the state level, as well as the zoning and density incentives that they are bringing into the local economies to support the growth of attainable and workforce housing. So that's a big, that's one of the biggest or latest updates in affordable housing and folks that are actually they want to get it done. I'm sure there's other examples from other panelists. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a couple other areas that give me a lot of optimism. I think the city of Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minneapolis especially, is doing a phenomenal job in terms of really thinking about land use policies and eliminating single family zoning to make it easier to build all types of housing and make more efficient use of the square footage that you have. I think that's phenomenal. I also think the city of Los Angeles in the last year or two has done a really nice job in terms of looking for ways to work with the private sector to create more affordable housing and to do it by streamlining the regulatory process to build affordable housing. And obviously with that, there's a requirement that the units are affordable and remain affordable, but they're able to really cut down on the cost to build, cut down on the cost to buy and preserve units at affordable rents, and to do so with minimal subsidy for the moderate income rents. It allows them then to dedicate more subsidy to folks at the lower and the very low income threshold. So I think there's some really innovative things that are going on in the local government and state government in terms of looking for ways to build more housing. Always use more.
Yeah, of course. David, I saw you come off mute. You want to add to those two responses?
Sure. I think the standard approach has been for a long time to try to incentivize the private sector to produce more housing. And of course, we need more housing. So supply is certainly an issue. The Live Local Act is largely dedicated to various subsidies, incentives, tax relief that would incentivize the production of housing in Florida, and ideally reserve some segment for the multifamily, certain segment or percent of the units for what they call affordable housing. They have a pretty interesting way to define that. Sometimes it's between 80% and 120% of area median income. I'm sure that's attractive to the builders and the developers, but I'm not sure that's ultimately going to solve the problem. So I'm not one that thinks supply alone is going to solve the problem, given the way the rental housing market works. But I certainly encourage those policies and any kind of zoning reform, which is very difficult to get passed in Florida, would also, I think, be very helpful. In terms of ideas that are a little out of the mainstream and I think need to be pursued further, not to the exclusion of what's happening on the supply side, but I have pointed to what's happening in Montgomery County, Maryland. They have created a, I think, innovative way to publicly finance, support, build a publicly owned nonprofit mixed income housing. So from my perspective, that would be the best route to go to ensure affordability, given some of the trends I'm seeing, as I described in Jacksonville. So I would find that to be one of the more interesting ones. It's got quite a bit of media attention, and I think local governments, municipalities, counties are trying to see whether they can replicate what is probably a pretty challenging kind of financing formula. But nonetheless, that for me is one of the bright spots.
Thank you for that, David. Richard?
Yeah, thanks. And these are great points. And one of the things that I've taken away from watching a lot of these innovative programs come through is an increasing sense of governments working coherently to try to come up with proposals that can be met positively by a broad set of communities. And David mentioned some of these. I mean, there are a couple more, and there's this growing trend towards what's come to be known as light touch zoning, right? Where we're not going to build a 20-story apartment building on every suburban block somewhere, but things like in California, they have the Yes in My Backyard, the YIMBY, which has been very much focused so far on ADUs, on auxiliary development units. So these can be things as a room on a garage, or a very small unit on a site, or a converted structure like an old barn or a shed or something that goes on this way. And they've been responsible for something like nearly 20% of new units that are built in recent years. And, it's onesies and twosies, but in California, you can multiply that times a big number and it can work. Another thing I've seen closer to my home here in New Jersey is we've seen some lighter easing of zoning requirements that allow for duplexes as well as single family homes. And there are parts, because we have a lot of older communities with houses that are not in great shape. We've seen a lot of replacements going from 1 to 2 units this way. And again, it increases density, not too bad, but I think what people are finding is that it also serves to reduce the tax burden on the existing population by just moving these in. And the final point I make is that if you're aiming these, they're not all aimed. I mean, the heaviest burden falls on your extremely low income households. It's just that's where the need is greatest. But by making more supply at a bit above that, because an issue is that folks who make more than who can afford more than a very low rent dwelling are choosing to do that anyway. But by making more opportunities for the just above their areas, it takes some of the pressure off on the very low end. So I'm pretty encouraged by these kinds of developments.
Thank you as well, Richard. When thinking of, so, we've used a lot of terms on this call, but thinking about, who are the unique players involved in, going from an affordable housing idea to actually moving tenants in? Like who are some of the unique players that you typically would not have in a quote unquote standard commercial investment?
I guess I can
Go
jump
ahead,
in.
Joel. You're closest
Not
to
not
it.
my area of expertise, yeah.
Yeah, no, you're on the front lines here, Joel.
Yeah, no problem. So I would say your typical or your atypical players or parties would be your housing finance agency, for one. Now that is every state has a housing financing agency. There could be state or local, there could be multiple levels, but there's usually some level of housing finance agency that receives the ability to tax credit allocation as well as volume cap allocate private activity bonds that you'll have from the feds, and they essentially disperse those, or they are the servicer for those 2 points of contact. The second one I would say is your tax credit investor or syndicator. They are the either direct banks or multi-funds that are looking to purchase the tax credits from excuse me, from your awarded developer or nonprofits or whoever is being allocated those tax credits to. And then I would say the third is not too atypical, because you can find conventional deals that have GSE products, but government sponsored entities. So that's your Fannie, Freddie entities that are usually for multifamily spaces where I usually operate, where we typically operate, you'll have tax exempt loans, and tax exempt loans would be a specific product that you'll find through either FHA or the GSE wheelhouse that you will typically see in your conventional finance. So those are 3 parties that you would see from not see from a conventional project.
Thanks, Joel. Anybody care to add to that list of items? Of course,
I think Joel nailed it.
Yep. So, we've talked about, from the supply side, what are we seeing, in our research or in our work day to day that renters are facing on this? Are there issues besides, of course, the supply? What are renters also facing and trying to identify these affordable housing units?
Yeah, I would say just from the work that we do and what we've seen, I'll start with the good news. And the good news is that, at least at a national level, we're finally at a point where we've seen income growth outpace rent growth for a number of months. I think it's been about 16 months now. Obviously, that doesn't take away from the damage that's being done by the fact that too many people are paying, more than 30% of their income for rent, and in many cases, more than 50% of their income for rent. And so I think, some of the challenges you see is, obviously, wage growth continues to be an issue. You're also starting to see with the cost of housing, coming up, it's harder for folks to get into a single family home. So they typically will stay in their multifamily unit longer, to Richard's point. And when we don't see that transition across the housing spectrum, it makes it a lot harder for folks on the lowest end of the income spectrum to have housing that's available and affordable to them. And so really being able to unlock that spectrum, I think, is really, really critical. And then also ensuring that the properties are operated and maintained in a way that's healthy and safe for the people who live there. We have a lot of old properties in the United States, especially in a lot of our metro areas. And so making sure that the properties are funded in a way so that they can actually make those improvements without having to drastically increase rents. Those are some challenges as well. So it's a challenging environment, especially with where we're at in terms of the cost of materials and the cost of labor and the cost of capital.
Thanks, Bob.
I would just add a couple of things. One is when you have these private investment firms, institutional investors coming in and purchasing all these single family homes. That's a demand side activity that raises the cost of housing. Also makes it more difficult for first-time home buyers. We see a lot of this in Jacksonville. We talk to real estate people, realtors who find that people who are making bids on homes constantly lose them. They're losing out to people who are paying cash. Many of those people, because they can't get the home that they want, or the prices are going up because of the rising demand, scooping up all these homes, they end up in a multifamily apartment complex. Sometimes a multifamily apartment complex owned by the same national investment firm that's been buying up the homes in Jacksonville. The same thing is happening in the multifamily apartment complex. Bob mentioned the necessity to maintain these properties, and we visit these properties and we interview tenants who live there, and the number of routine code violations, regardless of who owns them. We're not just talking about small local, what you might call mom and pop investors that might own maybe a 5 to 10 unit property. I'm talking about large multifamily apartment units are not well maintained, but the rent is high and there are lots of fees. And again, I'm going back to this business model. I do want to make a distinction between people who are developing and building the housing and increasing supply. I think that's one sector. The sector that's more problematic and the one that's had the greatest negative impact in Jacksonville are the firms, the private equity firms, the institutional investors that are buying up existing properties. We just finished a report on multifamily properties. And, they're buying those, they're not interested in providing housing. They're interested in controlling assets for their investors, and they're extracting income from those assets. The only way they're going to, give the return to the investors, which they promise on their website, is to raise rent, add fees, and reduce costs. And often the reduction in cost has to do with maintenance. And we're seeing this across the board. And then, after 4 or 5 years, they sell these properties to somebody else, which creates enormous amount of instability for the renters and tenants in Jacksonville. So that's a pattern that, we observe, we're concerned with, and we think, something has to be done about maybe the concentrated ownership of housing, single-family homes converted to rentals, and the multifamily apartment complexes.
Dave, if you don't mind, so the Live Local Act that Joel mentioned earlier, will that play a role in improving renters' ability, or from your, again, we don't know, but from your perspective, does it have a chance to do that at all?
No, we're in Florida. This is a conservative state. It's not an insignificant piece of legislation, relative to what's been done in the past. It's good to see that this is getting a lot of attention. But, for the most part, it's largely designed to the benefit of the developers and the builders. Ideally, as Richard said, that might trickle down. It might. I don't think there's any guarantee. The question for me is always, who owns these properties and for what purpose? And that's an important question. And often they're owned for the purpose of extracting income over short periods of time. And then to make it more attractive to sell, obviously you have to show that people who are living there are paying relatively high rent. That increases the market value. So I don't think the Live Local Act addresses any of that. And in fact, one of the first provisions of the Live Local Act was to eliminate the only remaining loophole that existed in the state of Florida that allowed for any rent stabilization in any community. And that was a tough thing we don't have rent control. That's totally prohibited. In Florida, rent stabilization is something you can accomplish locally if you put it on a ballot initiative and it gets 60% support, then you can put temporary rent stabilization. That happened in Orange County, in Orlando, but that's been, the kibosh has been put on that because it's preempted now.
Okay.
So, there's an emphasis in the way they think about housing. I don't think it's, again, entirely insignificant. I just think it's insufficient because we've been following these policies for a long time, incentivizing private sector builders and developers through supply side mechanisms.
Okay.
And I haven't seen that necessarily produce what I think all hope to see.
Thanks, David. One question to the group is, so of course we're starting to see more and more counties providing guaranteed money for some of the residents. I believe there are typically no stipulation on how the money should be used, but do we see that as a possible solution, one of the solutions to help improving folks' ability to afford housing when they're given a quote unquote guaranteed stipend? Have you guys seen any of your research at all that where it's helping improve folks' ability to find affordable housing? Affordable and suitable housing. Sorry, Bob, I didn't cut you off. Go ahead.
Just one point of clarification. When you said stipend, are you referring to like project-based vouchers, or are you saying stipend to the residents or developers?
Stipends to the residents.
Residents, yeah. So like a voucher, are you saying from like
Yeah,
a housing?
we call it a voucher, yes.
Yeah, so I think, just to take one step back, I think there are a number of not incentives, but there's a number of covenants as well as requirements in place with a lot of the funding, whether it be a stipend or a voucher or a local financing applicant grant or loan that have certain requirements that reduce some of the more predatory kind of operations that were mentioned earlier in the call. And I think in places that we've worked and folks like myself, we are in this game for the benefit of the residents, right? And there is a level of discretion that we make sure we bring to our projects, and just what that looks like from a day to day. This also, it comes into resident services, right? So you're not just completing projects and kind of like operating them. However, we do make sure that the on the back end and during the operations of the project, that residents are allowed to gain access to the various services through our resident service providers. That means anywhere from financial kind of support, what is it called, webinars, and other kind of activities that will provide them opportunities to actually be educated in making that switch from potentially renting to owning, right? That we had mentioned earlier in the call, so that they are able to create more wealth building within their own families. So resident services is a pretty big part of making sure affordable housing is completed in a way that's productive, and it's not just essentially focused on the bottom line. It becomes more about the residents, or incorporates the actual residents as well. Another thing I would just mention is that, a lot of the stipulations for the vouchers and all the HAP contracts and other HUD programs are CBE as well. So a lot of times, another way to incentivize or promote local improvements is through certified businesses, whether they be business minority-owned business, disadvantaged businesses, or women-owned businesses. And there's also a local business, LB, as well. So there are other incentives from a economic perspective, so that's just not just, again, just a bottom line or operating housing. It's also promoting the local economy and local businesses and small businesses, such that you are providing, I would say, more of a holistic approach to what's going in to these communities, and what's being supportive to the residents through the voucher programs. So that's some of the things some of the ways I think that, affordable housing can start to, or things that are happening within the affordable housing space that is protecting the resident, the local economy, as well as, the industry as a whole from some of the concerns that have been brought up.
Thanks for that, Joel. Richard, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Corey. This has been a great discussion. So as I sit up here in a world in the New York City metropolitan area, we face many of these issues, but with somewhat different perspective. Unlike Florida, about half the units in New York City have some sort of rent control attached to them on this side. And what we've developed is this giant annual, and I hate to use the word game, but process where in the budgeting process, what the rent limits are become part of that discussion, and how much you can do. And you have a very, I'm not going to call it evenly balanced, but you have very strong constituencies, both for the landlords and for the tenant advocates, who are in the middle of this. And for as much as everybody's unhappy when it's done, it comes to a conclusion. And if it tilts one way or another too much, there tends to be a reaction. I mean, there was a surprise tax on high-end properties, and nobody saw it coming because people thought it was going too far in the direction a couple years ago, and that has served to So it's just on that way, and we don't have. I mean, the buy to rent is not, it's very regional. You see it in the South, you see it a bit in the Midwest. You don't see it so much. You might see it in the Inland Empire in California, but certainly not in the Northeast very much. And going on the demand side, the voucher programs are very strong, and they're not just vouchers for tenants, but it's also vouchers for properties. So if you make your property available, you can get a subsidy on this side, and those have been strong programs. There's a big infrastructure to help people get into these programs. There in every borough, there are processes for applying for these. Again, there's nowhere near enough of them, but it's not too hard. They're in many languages. We're a big city, people, a lot of immigrants, and again, you don't always end up with the result you would like, but the process is there and functions reasonably. And I just like to add, so one thing we face now in New York, which is in a sense is not so terrible for on the rental side, is we have a lot of really old, large apartment buildings in the city, 100 years old and more. They need work, and New York is not escaping the results of flooding and climate change. It's been remarkable the last few years. I was trapped up on campus a week or so ago. The subways were all down. Columbia sits on Morningside Heights, a very high point. You're okay up there, but you can be trapped sometimes. And we're seeing a flood like this once or twice a year. And you probably hadn't seen one 10 years before. And so you have a lot of erosion going on. They've done some studies, and NYSERDA, the local agency, and partly with the support of the New York Fed, the market rate, the less than half that it's going to be expensive, but they can do it. But there are enormous costs facing the affordable space on this side. They tend to be in the lowest lying areas. They tend to not be in the best shape. And there's going to be a real challenge here to get these buildings up to snuff. I'm talking $30 billion a year or something of investments out for out till 2030 to get these things going, and that's just an enormous challenge that we're going to have to face.
Thanks for that. Given this is Fair Housing Month, one of the things thinking about about the stipends and the vouchers, we are aware also that sometimes that will not allow a renter to receive an apartment because of the concern the landowner has, the property owner has on them paying with a stipend or a voucher. So we'd be remiss not to mention that during Fair Housing Month. So we have some questions, but before we go there, oh, sorry, Lisa.
No, go ahead. I was just going to give you the question, but go ahead, Corey.
I just have one more question for the panelists. So we've had a lot of discussion around the things that we are either researching or doing our day-to-day lives, but for the audience, what are some of the key indicators? Again, they don't have to be, a standard list. What are some of the key indicators for you to see what cities or what communities are doing well with affordable housing? And then, of course, where